Where are they? Margaret's shrill voice cut through my office like a knife, making me jump in my chair. My ex-mother-in-law stood in the doorway, her perfectly manicured hands clutching a manila envelope, her face twisted with rage. Behind her, my ex-husband's sister, Amanda, looked equally furious. Where are who? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I gestured for my assistant to hold my calls. After 5 years of peace following my divorce from their precious David, I hadn't expected to see any of the Henderson family again. Don't play dumb with us, Victoria, Margaret spat, storming toward my desk. Our grandchildren, David's children. The ones you've been hiding from us for the past 6 years. I felt my jaw drop. What children? David and I never had kids. Amanda stepped forward, yanking photos from the envelope her mother held. She slapped them onto my desk, scattering my carefully organized case files. These children, Victoria, stop lying. My hands trembled as I picked up the first photo. It showed 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, playing in what looked like a backyard. They had dark hair like mine, and something about their features did remind me of David. But I'd never seen them before in my life. I don't understand, I said, looking up at their expectant faces. These aren't my children. David and I tried for years, remember? That's part of why we divorced. We couldn't have kids. More lies. Margaret's voice rose higher. We have proof, medical records showing you were pregnant, birth certificates, school records. Everything. My head spun. This had to be some kind of sick joke. I'd never been pregnant, never given birth. The fertility treatments we tried had all failed. It was one of the many things David had held against me when he left. Get out, I said firmly, standing up. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I want you out of my office right now. Or what? Amanda sneered. You'll hide these kids somewhere else? Move them to another state like you did last time? Last time? What are you talking about? My voice cracked. I've never moved any children anywhere. I don't have children. Margaret pulled out her phone. We're calling our lawyer. We have rights as grandparents. You can't keep them from us forever. I grabbed my own phone, hands shaking as I pulled up my lawyer's number. Sarah had handled my divorce and knew everything about my marriage to David. She'd know how to deal with this insanity. Fine, I said, pressing the call button. Let's get lawyers involved, because I can prove I've never had children. As I waited for Sarah to answer, Margaret pulled out more photos. These showed the same children at what appeared to be a birthday party, then at a beach, then in front of a Christmas tree. In each one, they looked happy, healthy, and completely unfamiliar to me. Sarah, I said when she picked up, trying to keep my voice from shaking, I need you to come to my office right now. My ex-husband's family is here claiming I have children I've been hiding. They have photos and supposedly documents. There was a pause on the other end. Don't say anything else, Sarah replied, her tone sharp. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't let them leave. Margaret was still ranting about grandparents' rights and legal action when my assistant, Jackie, poked her head in. Victoria? There's a man here asking about the children too. He says he's a private investigator hired by Mr. Henderson. My stomach dropped. David was behind this, but why? What could he possibly gain from this elaborate charade? Send him in, I said, meeting Margaret's triumphant gaze. Let's see what evidence you think you have. The private investigator was a tall man in a cheap suit who introduced himself as Frank Moore. He carried a thick folder and had the decency to look uncomfortable as he laid out what he'd found. Mrs. Reed has been living under multiple aliases, he explained to Margaret and Amanda. She's moved these children between 3 different states in the past 6 years, always staying just ahead of Mr. Henderson's attempts to locate them. That's impossible, I interrupted. I've lived in the same house for 8 years. I've worked at this law firm for 10. Anyone can verify that. Frank pulled out more documents, school records, medical files, even what looked like birth certificates, all showing that I, Victoria Reed, had given birth to twins on May 15th, 6 years ago. But I hadn't. I would remember giving birth to twins. I would remember having children. I would know if I were a mother. Wouldn't I? A horrible thought crept in. There had been that 3-month period during my marriage when I'd suffered from severe depression, when everything was a blur of medications and therapy. But surely I would remember being pregnant, giving birth. Sarah burst into the office before I could spiral further into doubt. One look at the scene, the scattered photos, the documents, my ex-mother-in-law's righteous anger, and her face hardened. "Everyone sit down," she commanded. "Victoria, don't say another word. Mr. Moore, I'm going to need to see every single document you have, and I want to know exactly who hired you and when." As Sarah took control of the situation, I stared at the photos of the children who were supposedly mine. Their dark hair, their familiar features, the way the little girl's nose crinkled when she smiled, just like David's did. But they weren't mine. They couldn't be. Could they? The next morning, I sat in Sarah's office, staring at the pile of documents spread across her desk. After clearing everyone out yesterday, she'd spent hours examining every piece of evidence the private investigator had brought. "These are good forgeries," she said, holding up one of the birth certificates. "Really good. But they are forgeries. Look at the hospital name, Mercy General in Portland. That hospital closed in 2015, a year before these certificates were supposedly issued." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "So I'm not crazy. Those aren't my children." "No," Sarah confirmed, "but someone went to a lot of trouble to make it look like they are. The question is why." I picked up one of the photos, studying the children's faces. They do look like they could be mine and David's. The timing would be right if I had been pregnant when he claimed I was emotionally unstable. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Victoria, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there any possibility, any at all, that you could have had children during that period?" "No," I said firmly. "I was depressed, yes. The fertility treatments had failed again. David was already pulling away. But I wasn't so far gone that I wouldn't remember being pregnant, having children." "Okay." Sarah started organizing the documents into neat piles. "Then we need to figure out who these children really are and why your ex-husband's family is so convinced they're yours." Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression turning grim. "Speaking of David, he just filed for an emergency custody hearing. He's claiming you kidnapped his children 6 years ago, and he's only now located them." "What?" I stood up, my hands shaking. "He can't do that. There are no children to have custody of." "Sit down," Sarah said firmly. "This is good. It means we can get him under oath, make him explain where these supposedly missing children have been all this time." I sank back into my chair, my mind racing. But what if he actually has children somewhere? What if he had them with someone else while we were still married? Sarah's eyes lit up. That's actually a very interesting theory. Give me a minute." She turned to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. After a few minutes, she sat back with a satisfied smile. "Got it. Meet Emily Carson, pediatric nurse at County General. Started working there 7 years ago, right around the time you and David were going through fertility treatments." She turned the screen toward me, showing a social media profile. My heart stopped. There was Emily, a pretty blonde woman, standing with 2 dark-haired children, the same children from the photos. "Those are her kids," I whispered. "But why would David?" "Because 6 years ago," Sarah continued, scrolling through Emily's profile. "She filed a paternity suit against a prominent local businessman who she claimed was the father of her twins. The case was sealed, but given the timing, David," I finished, "he got her pregnant while we were trying to have children, while I was going through fertility treatments." The pieces started falling into place. The timing of my emotional breakdown, David's insistence that I had been pregnant but blocked it out, his family's genuine belief that these children were mine. "He's been lying to everyone," I said, my voice shaking with anger now. "He told his family I was the mother to cover up his affair, and now that Emily's gone public, now he needs to maintain the lie." Sarah finished. "Or his whole story falls apart. But he made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" Sarah held up the forged birth certificate again. "He listed you as the mother but kept Emily's original choice of names for the twins, James and Lily Carson, not Henderson or Reed." She started gathering the documents into a folder. "The emergency hearing is tomorrow morning. I think it's time we invited Emily Carson to tell her side of the story." I stared at the photo of the children. David's children, but not mine. Never mine. His family really doesn't know. Do they? They actually believe I'm some kind of monster who stole their grandchildren. "That's what David wanted them to believe," Sarah said softly. It was easier than admitting the truth. "Well," I stood up, straightening my shoulders. "Let's see how they handle the truth now." As I left Sarah's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "We're praying you'll do the right thing and bring our grandchildren home." I saved the message. Tomorrow, they'd learn exactly what the right thing was, and it wasn't what they expected. Looking at Emily's photo again, I felt a strange mix of emotions. These children, who could have been mine in another life, were innocent in all this. They deserved to know their family, their real story. And tomorrow, one way or another, the truth would come out. I just hoped they were ready for it. The courtroom was packed the next morning. David sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing the same self-righteous expression I remembered from our divorce. Margaret and Amanda sat directly behind him, shooting daggers at me with their eyes. Sarah had positioned me perfectly, just close enough to Emily Carson that when she walked in with the twins, David's face went completely white. "What is she doing here?" he hissed to his lawyer. Before anyone could respond, the judge entered and called the emergency hearing to order. David's lawyer jumped up, launching into an impassioned speech about a mother stealing children away, about grandparents' rights, and about family reunification. I watched Margaret dabbing her eyes with a tissue, completely caught up in the performance. She really had no idea what her precious son had done. "Your Honor," Sarah said when it was our turn, "before we proceed, I'd like to enter into evidence the true birth certificates of James and Lily Carson, along with their mother's paternity suit from 6 years ago." David's lawyer objected, but Sarah was ready. The children Mr. Henderson claims were stolen from him. They're sitting right here with their actual mother, Emily Carson. The only person doing any stealing is Mr. Henderson, stealing the truth from his family and trying to steal these children's identities. The judge looked at the documents, then at David, whose confidence was visibly crumbling. "Mr. Henderson, would you like to explain why there are 2 different birth certificates for these children?" There must be some mistake," David stammered. "The mistake," Emily Carson spoke up from behind me, her voice strong and clear, "was thinking you could hide the truth forever, David. These are my children, our children, the ones you denied until it became convenient to claim them." The gasps from Margaret and Amanda were audible. The judge called a brief recess to review all the evidence, but the damage was done. I watched as David's carefully constructed lie fell apart around him. During the break, Margaret approached me in the hallway, her face ashen. "Victoria, we didn't know. He told us you had a breakdown, that you took the babies and ran. And you believed him," I said quietly, "just like you believed him when he said our fertility treatments failed because of my stress. Because it was easier than questioning your perfect son." She started to respond, but Emily walked up with the twins. "Mrs. Henderson, I think it's time you met your grandchildren. Properly this time." I slipped away as Margaret faced the reality of what her son had done. The tears in her eyes were different now, shame and regret replacing righteous anger. Back in the courtroom, the judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Not only was David's emergency custody petition denied, but he was also facing potential criminal charges for filing false documents. The judge ordered a full investigation into the forged birth certificates. "I hope it was worth it," I said to David as he hurried past me afterward. "All these years of lies just to avoid admitting you had an affair." He stopped, turning to face me. "You were always so perfect, weren't you? The successful lawyer, the victim. You have no idea what it's like, disappointing everyone." "No," I cut him off. "I just know what it's like to be disappointed. By you, by your family, by their willingness to believe the worst of me rather than the truth about you." 6 months later, I received a letter from Emily. She enclosed a photo of the twins at their 7th birthday party, surrounded by the Henderson family, minus David, who was serving time for document fraud. "They ask about you sometimes," she wrote. "I tell them you're the brave lady who helped their grandparents find them. Maybe someday, when they're older, they'll understand the whole story." I pinned the photo to my office wall, next to my law degree and the newspaper article about David's conviction, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained, the truth, my reputation, and finally, closure. Margaret still sends me Christmas cards. Each one contains an apology, as if she's trying to make up for years of blind faith in her son. I keep them in a drawer, unopened. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. As for me, I sold my house and moved to a new city, starting fresh where no one knew my story. My new office has a view of the sunrise, and every morning I remind myself that sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you exactly where you need to be. The children who were never mine are happy, loved, and surrounded by family who finally knows the truth. In the end, that's worth more than any victory in court. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, I look at their photo and smile, knowing that doing the right thing meant letting go of the lie that had haunted us all.